Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for watching or listening. It's Liam Plantry back with you today with another episode of the Simply Inspired podcast. And today I have a very special guest. Today's guest, Gabe Joyes, an ultramarathon runner, a mountain runner, a man with a passion for nature, for the great outdoors, particularly for mountains. Today we're going to be talking about, as always, the actual sporting aspect, running up mountains, running high altitude, all of these amazing things in the beautiful mountains of Wyoming, where Gabe now calls home. So we will be talking about that. But as always, we'll be going a little bit deeper beyond the sporting aspect and touching on some of the mindset topics, some of the mental toughness, some of the work that Gabe is doing in other areas of his life outside running as well. Also very, very interesting to touch on. So stay tuned, everyone. Some great content coming up. And Gabe, thank you, my friend, for taking time out of your morning to do this. I know we booked this quite a while ago, so it's great to finally be here and finally be talking with you, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. Thanks for having me. It was worth the wait.
Excellent. Well, it will be, I hope, but we'll see. I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. So obviously, now you're very established as an athlete. You're very established with, being very well known in that field and everything. But what I do sometimes, not always, but sometimes, is go back to the beginning and talk about people's early lives. Now, you're in Wyoming now, but as I understand it, you're not originally from there, but you have always had a passion for mountains or for the great outdoors. So I'd like to just go back and talk about where that passion started, maybe talk about any other sports you were involved in before running, and just to get a little feel for your early life, basically, if that's okay, please.
Sure, of course. I've lived in Wyoming now for 15 or 16 years, so like it very much feels like home. But I grew up in Wisconsin and kind of the upper Midwest of the United States. I grew up in a little bit of a suburb just outside of Madison, Wisconsin, and I think even as a real youngster, I developed a passion for the outdoors simply through my parents. I think they often took us on different like hiking trips or outings to different state parks in the area. And so, in like the United States, a state park is a relatively small area of land, with public access. There might be like a bit of a forest and maybe a lake with a beach or something like that. But to me, that was a big, wild and adventurous place to explore, and I loved that as a kid. And sometimes in the summer, we would take a vacation or a holiday to one of the larger national parks in the United States and go explore. And those experiences kind of always blew my mind and left me always wanting more. I kind of maybe a little bit always had this feeling that I was born in the wrong place, born in the wrong state, and I maybe wasn't living in an environment that would like felt the most natural or just like happy for me. Like I just was really drawn to those places, and Wisconsin was a fine place to grow up, but it wasn't kind of what spoke to my heart. Um, and so what took up a lot of my time through all my younger years and my teenage years, I spent a lot of time playing soccer or football. And that was a huge part of my life. I traveled all over the country, playing in different teams and different high level competitions, and I ended up playing in college and university, and that was a really important part of my life up until about the time I was 22 or 23 years old, and at that point I was able to kind of adjust life and uh, spend a whole lot more time in the Mountain West of the United States um, and adventuring and working and living in states like Colorado and Montana and Wyoming.
Well, that's a great breakdown of where it all started. I was reading about the soccer side of things earlier. Obviously, massively popular where I'm from, although I personally prefer, your American football because it's closer to rugby, which is actually where I'm from in
Okay.
Wales. Because I'm from Wales, not from England, so it's bigger there. But anyway, that's just some trivia for you. But soccer growing up, so was it something that the feel I'm getting with this, you felt you had to do in a way, or you felt you were doing, but it wasn't quite you, or did you enjoy it during your time as soccer? I'd like to get a feel for your expectations of that prior to transitioning into running, transitioning into a different type of outdoorsy lifestyle, if that makes sense, to your
Yeah,
inner journey as well.
I absolutely loved it. I was all in. I loved playing soccer. I like literally couldn't get enough. Um, I had a street light in front of my house, and the road was flat, and I used to like stay out until like midnight, just practicing in the road because that was the flattest surface I had around. Like, I mean, I was all in and very, very dedicated. I'd walk around my house with a ball constantly on my foot, like brushing my teeth or whatever I was doing. So that was definitely a passion of mine. Um, and it's something I still like care deeply for. I watch English Premier League games every Saturday morning. That is like a standard tradition in my household, and something I'm invested in. I spent some time coaching, but at the moment, uh, it plays a nice role in my life where it's almost like a little bit of escapism. It's not work. It's not how do I say it? It just gets to be fun. It doesn't have to be, like playing soccer in college or on these competitive teams. There's a lot of pressure to perform all the time and to be at your best. And even when I was coaching, there's still that same pressure to try to win. And I'm at a point in my life for soccer. It's like it's just really fun to watch and enjoy and yell at the TV and that kind of thing.
Absolutely, a beautiful game, absolutely beautiful game, and it's something that any country you go to, pretty much people have that passion. I mean, it's well, broadly speaking, I don't want to offend anyone else, but I would say the most universal sport in the world. You can go anywhere, and it's something people have in common, which is a wonderful aspect. I'm glad you're still enjoying that. I think I was picking up on the pressure side of it, but also the joy, and so that explains the balancing out there. So when it comes to the mountains, when it comes to running, obviously, already having the fitness, already having the mental strength and the physical strength, I guess, is a good way to look at it from your soccer background. But when I was reading up on this, you didn't start running in the mountains straight away, as I understand it. You started more, was it more sort of hiking or exploring them in a different way like that?
Yeah, yeah. My earliest experience in the mountains were all about like backpacking trips, camping with a big old load of stuff on your back. Um, my wife and I, during kind of our last couple of years in college, we worked at a summer camp in Montana where we would take middle school and high school age students on backpacking trips and was really exploring the mountains that way. So at a nice, I mean, I wouldn't call it like a leisurely pace because it's hard when you're carrying a bunch of stuff on your back, but it's certainly at a slower pace. And you're immersed in it because you're out there for a very long time, and that's a really wonderful thing. And got to be very comfortable in the backcountry doing that sort of activity. And so that was my first real like uh, yeah, spending lots of time in the mountains. At the same time, though, most mornings when I was working at this summer camp that was deep in the mountains of Montana, I would get up in the morning, nice and early in the morning, and maybe go for like a 45 or 60-minute run on like a dirt road or a trail. And that was just the only goal there was just like get a little bit of exercise and just to like breathe a little bit harder, move a little bit faster, and it just felt good. And it was fun. And then even if I was spending like a lot of the rest of the day hiking, I wasn't going on any huge adventure runs or anything like that just yet.
Sense that makes sense because it explains the transition from one passion to another passion, if you like. I mean, obviously both passions are still part of your life with the soccer and with this, but it explains that process because it's never an overnight thing, is it? It's always a transition. So
Yep.
at the point where, as you describe on your website and things I was looking at, starting to take faster, lighter trips, I think was how you described it in that context. Again, it's a process. It's not an overnight thing. So what was the transition there to go out, with a little bit less? I mean, you've mentioned the fitness runs of 45, 60 minutes. Was it just a progression from there of how far can I go type of thing, or was there another motivation in there maybe?
I think there was kind of two things that affected that transition, and transition really is the right word. So at the summer camp, my wife and I worked at, between camp sessions, we would get somewhere between 24 to 48 hours off between like a new group, like one group of campers leaving and another arriving. And so kind of the popular thing for staff to do would be to like go and try to climb some mountain that was in the area. And usually it would be like a really ambitious hike, where we'd load up our packs with all sorts of stuff and hike as fast as we could and try to get to the top of the mountain, camp overnight, and then like try to hike back to the base camp, to be back in time before the start of the next camp session. And like being late was unacceptable. Like you could not be late coming back from break. And so quite a few of these like breaks between camp sessions ended with us running back to camp with like 30 or 40 pounds on our backs, um, scrambling as fast as we could to try to not be late. And so as these trips progressed, it got to the point where I was like, "Whoa, we need to carry less stuff so we can hike a little bit faster." And so these trips started to become a little bit more minimal, a little bit more minimal, and really and it came from a practical sense of, well, we want to climb these mountains, but we can't be late getting back. And so it turned into really, really lightweight backpacking. And by the time towards the very end of our time working there, we kind of had this like idea of like, what if we didn't even camp? What if we just ran and carried hardly anything? Then we'll have no problem getting back on time. And um, and that was like literally how that transition happened. It was because of like time constraint. I would say the other way that transition happened is then after my wife and I no longer worked at that camp, but we were living and working in Wyoming. You only have so much time on a weekend to go and adventure, explore, and so our trips had to become a little bit faster as well. When we were expecting our first child, I did a lot of hiking and a lot of adventuring still with my wife while she was pregnant, but I still kind of had a desire to maybe go even farther and do some extra things. So sometimes it was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go by myself. I'm gonna run up this mountain. I'll be home by dinner time, and she'd be like, okay. So it was sort of these like life constraints and life pressures that led to moving faster in the mountains was more practical and made more sense. And maybe just given the background of playing soccer and fast movement was maybe kind of more satisfying in a lot of ways. I still love backpacking. I still love hiking and camping and moving in that slower manner. I think that's really fun too. But it was kind of nice adding the running piece because it sort of just brought a little bit of that other sort of movement that I really enjoyed throughout my years playing soccer, and it just led to mountain running.
Okay, and that explains the transition so well. I'm glad you covered the time management side of things and the family and some of these other practicalities. The reason I say that is for people not familiar with this, they might have a more not a glamorous idea, but they might have an idea that it's simpler than it is. But the fact you have to fit in your runs around everything is it's valuable to mention that. So moving on from that, another transition then, as seen as that was the right word before, is from doing this for the love to doing this in a more competitive sense, a more organized or structured sense in however you personally term that, how you view that. In other words, going from, okay, I really enjoy this to actually I can take this a bit further, not in terms of the distance, but as I say, in terms of competition, in terms of finding out your best. So what was the transition with that from basically unstructured to more, but it's sort of structured because you're fitting it in your day. So I acknowledge that. But in terms of just doing it for the love to doing it for sport, if that makes sense.
Sure. I was kind of hilariously naive. I had no idea other people were doing these sort of things. I didn't know races existed. And somehow I think I read an article somewhere, something about trail races or whatever. And I was like, oh, well, that could be kind of fun. And I remember trying to like doing some Googling to try to find some trail races. And the first trail race I found was the Hard Rock 100. And I thought, oh, this looks cool. I'll sign up for that. Turns out you can't just sign up for Hard Rock. You have to do a qualifier, and there's a lottery, and there's all it's one of the most popular races in the world. Um, and then I started finding that there's other races you could do, and I just picked one that was like relatively close to me that looked cool, and I thought this could be a really fun challenge, something to do. It was called a Bighorn 50 mile here in Wyoming. I trained for that, having no idea what I was doing, no idea how to train appropriately. I just kind of went running all over the mountains. And I did the race. and it was kind of a disaster is a really overly dramatic word, but it did not go well. Like I did not finish feeling good. I was like dramatically slower than I wanted to be. I felt sick. I felt terrible, and I finished kind of being like, whoa, there's this like whole other world out here of this sport, and people know what they're doing, and it was almost like this kind of like wonderful humbling of like it was obvious there was so much room for improvement. And even though I kind of got clobbered by it, it was sort of like, I want to do that again. I want another crack at this. I want another try. Um, and then from that, because, 50 miles just went so well, my next thing I did was sign up for a 100-mile race to see if I could maybe make that go better. And I had a similar experience with that with my first 100-mile race. It didn't go that well. I finished, but, was about ready to crawl across the finish line. Um, but by that point, I was like really kind of it was something that kind of really captivated me. At that point, I was like, there's just so much potential, and the things you can do are so amazing. Like the fact that people can run 50 or 100 miles was still like just blowing my mind. Um, and then the training for it was just fun because I was doing what I love, just running around the mountains. So then it wasn't until I did my third race, which was another attempt at 100 miles, that it actually went like fairly well. I started to figure things out a little bit. And then that's when it was really easy to go all in because I was able to see some progress, right? To, working on that element of self improvement and have a third try to finish a race and not feel like I was, had one foot in the grave or something. After that, it was really easy to just kind of lose myself to the sport in a really positive way.
And the rest is history, as they say,
And the rest is history.
which we will come to very shortly. Before we do, though, I'd like to touch on something there with some of the changes or some of the things you adapted from struggling with the races to, them going relatively well, as you said. Now, I think it's probably too big a topic to cover everything, but if we narrow it down and cover a few key elements of your changes physically, mentally, training regime, because as I said earlier, you had fitness, you had the mental toughness, which is very important. I will also come back to that later as well. But there are bound to be tweaks and little things you made, maybe with diet, maybe with certain other things, and the ones that you regard to be most important, going from struggling to, well, obviously now, I mean, it's second nature to you, but particularly in those early days, some of the changes that you made, would be good to mention, please.
Sure. There's a real adaptation physically to be able to run those sorts of distances where I was like a fit 20 something year old guy with this background in playing soccer, but that's really, sprinting around a soccer field is really different than running for like 12 or 20 hours in the mountains. It's a different kind of fitness. And so to learn to adapt to that level of intensity, like that relatively slower pace and how to run a sustainable way. Um, that was something that took a lot to get used to. A lot of like like so many new runners, I struggle with like a lot of soft tissue injuries, like aching knees and tendons and that sort of thing. The body had to get used to that. And I think for anyone who's kind of jumping into 100-mile races like I did, it's probably pretty inevitable. Um, I did have to do a lot of work on my diet. One thing that was maybe of particularly of note is in what year would it have been? 2011 or maybe it's 2012, I was diagnosed with celiac disease. Um, so I had all sorts of stomach problems, particularly when I was running for a long time. Um, and getting that piece figured out made a really big difference in my life. And so to learn and adapt and live with celiac disease, which really wasn't overall too bad, but that was pretty critical as well to figure out.
Well, I'm actually a celiac sufferer as well, by the way, Gabe,
Oh,
which
no kidding.
yeah, I don't, I mean, it doesn't come up very often in these sorts of talks, or I'm not sure if it ever has actually, but yeah, I have exactly the same thing. So yeah, living with that, is and like you, there was quite a long period of time of not being diagnosed and various misdiagnoses and or just general confusion of, okay, what is this? I mean, I'm losing weight and there's all these different things. And but anyway, we won't get lost in that, but that's just a fascinating.
Yeah.
So You would have
Yeah,
been running these early races on totally the wrong type of food for your body. Am I correct in saying that? That's brutal. Um,
absolutely. In my mind, for a while, I thought it was totally normal to finish every single run getting to a bathroom as fast as you could, that kind of thing. Like I thought that was like a standard experience for people. Figured out actually it's not, you know. And so that was really nice to adjust to and adapt and get that dialed in. And now I think running and or eating and running is pretty straightforward and easy for me. So what a difference that makes.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, well, it's good to mention as well because it's one of those things. A lot of people out there raising awareness. There's a lot more awareness now than well, when I was first diagnosed, there was not that much, and it was quite limited. And now, a lot of restaurants and a lot of things, and there's a lot more people know what you're talking about. At least where I'm from. So there we are, an unexpected topic, but a very very good topic to mention. So, in terms of your progression, obviously getting into swing of things with 100-mile races and with all of these crazy distances and mountains. Before we get into the mindset and some of your proudest moments, a couple of other things, there's something sort of intangible that I'd like to touch on here, or something that maybe people don't bring up that much. You are obviously in incredibly beautiful locations in the world, with scenery, with things that you see that a lot of people doing sort of regular things, if they're not into the outdoors, they wouldn't necessarily see that. And I was wondering, even though it's a pretty big question, if there's certain ones that sort of stick with you in terms of being high up in the mountain or being in some remote place, that, as I say, somebody working in an office. I mean, obviously it's a choice to go out and see it, but some people don't always make the time, make the opportunity. And if there's any that have stuck with you as being particularly breathtaking or particularly amazing more than any other, or if maybe just being out there in Wyoming in the mountains every day is a blessing in that sense, I imagine. But I just wondered if there's some that stand out, even though it's a big question. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think everything you said is actually just true. There are lots of different places that I can think of that are especially memorable to me, where they've stopped me in my tracks. And I've looked around and said, like, wow, this is just unbelievable, and that's true. But I also think there's a lot of beauty in maybe locations that people maybe aren't wouldn't think of as being so spectacular, especially when you kind of really look around and find the details. Where I do a lot of my running in the foothills of the Wind River Mountains. There's a canyon called Sinks Canyon, and I spend, I don't know, 10 to 15 hours a week running in this canyon. I've ran the same trails hundreds of times, and I'm not even remotely tired of them. There's still wonderful things to see there, and you see it at different times of the day with different light and different seasons, slightly different vegetation, and all those different things. Where um, maybe it's not to take anything away from it. It's not as like as spectacular as maybe like the summit of a mountain in the Tetons or something like that. But just like you said, there's an appreciation for everywhere that I spend time, and that's ultimately like what gets me out the door. And if I'm not enjoying where I'm running, it doesn't last too long. um, those are for short runs.
Quite a beautiful answer in all fairness, because appreciating the simple things to us, well, to a certain degree, is very important. And in the end, that is what your life is comprised of, is those simple moments. So it's a very good, very, very good answer. So jumping into a couple of other things with the races, and what I often say to people at this point is I say, okay, I'd love to talk about like every single race or break it down, but I tend to break it down differently into, which ones were the toughest, which ones were your favorites, and, certain things. We'll come to that. The mindset topic I mentioned earlier on is an important one because mental toughness, I suppose the best way to put this or to open up this topic is the old nature nurture debate. Do you think it's something you were born with? Do you think it's something you've cultivated over time? both? Because what I'm getting at with this is you have to have a very strong will to do what you do. You have to have pushing through the pain barrier, the discipline. Obviously, you enjoy it, but when things don't go to plan, there's that aspect of sort of not panicking and keeping going. So there's a few different things. And I think that is a special talent in a way, even if it's something you've cultivated over time. Um, just as much as the physical side is the mental and emotional side when you maybe at times when your body's saying, oh, come on, please stop and everything, and you keep going at it. So there's quite a few different avenues to go down with this. But broadly speaking, do you think it's something that you've always had, or do you think it's something you've developed over time, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's a it's difficult to truly answer that, like to know the answer to that. But I can think of a few things um, that probably play a role. I was the youngest of four in my family. I particularly had two older brothers. And so I think without a doubt, I had to have a particular resilience as I was always trying to keep up with them. But all my siblings were strong athletes. My two older brothers in particular were very competitive, a very competitive mindset, and so I had to work really hard to keep up with them, or I face being left behind, which is as the little brother, that's not cool. So I think that probably played a pretty significant role in my life. Um, I also think maybe not growing up in a mountainous environment actually played a role in my life in a positive way. My family would take trips to these wonderful places. We'd spend a week there, and then we'd be back in Wisconsin. And so I maybe have always had um, an appreciation that like nothing is permanent, and that you don't all like I may not always be able to be in these wonderful places, and so every I guess the mindset of every time I'm in one of these places, that's a special opportunity, and that's something to not take for granted. And I think I carry that mindset with me in literally every single run I do, because the mountains kind of weren't always there for me as I wanted them to be, and now I'm fortunate that they are, but sort of never let go of that feeling. And so, even though I truly enjoy 99% of my running, but there's difficult moments in these long events like anyone experiences. And for me, I don't think about like, oh, I need to push through the pain or anything like that. For me, it's sort of like I can kind of shrug my shoulders at discomfort and stuff like and think, well, at least I'm in a really awesome place doing a really amazing thing, and I'm really grateful to be here. So I guess sometimes you have to feel rough every once in a while, and so that sort of thinking of like the appreciating where I am and gratitude for it is really what gets me through just about any challenging moments.
That's a wonderful answer. And as I said at the beginning, it's something that, yes, it applies to running and everything, but it applies to life in general. I think that that mindset, changing the perspective. It's a quote of change the way you look at things you look at change, or something along those lines. In other words, a change of perspective has
Yeah,
a wonder of good. I like that. So very cool. And again, it's something people don't see, isn't it? Just from hearing about the race, people don't see what's going through your mind in these
right.
moments. So very cool. Now, in terms of the toughest races, because as I said earlier, breaking it down for time and everything like this for our listeners, that comprises a number of different things as well, because it's not always the terrain, it's not always um physically in a race. Sometimes I speak to people about this and there was something going on in their life outside of the race they had to push through, or there's different things. And I know not to contradict what you said about the gratitude, because that's always there, but just in those situations where even if it is an enjoyable thing, a race is particularly challenging, but you overcame it. And that's really the focus, is not the focus on what happened, but the focus on how you overcame it and what you learned in an unusual way. And it's a hard one to break down, because running like this is tough. I mean, I know you love it and you're in these special places, but it is tough. So picking one, sometimes people can't even pick one. I'm just giving you the context to of this. But in one way or another, mentally, physically, Can you share with us maybe one or two that were unusually challenging in some way and what you learned from overcoming that challenge, if there's any that come to mind?
Sure. Maybe I'll talk about two different races from the same year because I had a really different mindset for both of them, and I learned a lot from both of them. Back in 2016, I did a few different races that year, but one race I particularly remember fondly is called the Never Summer 100K, a really mountainous race in the mountains of Colorado. And I remember I went into that race carrying an injury. I had an injury and I had a tendon injury, and I wasn't. My expectations were low that I was going to be able to finish this 100K because I was carrying this injury, but I'd already spent my money on the registration fee, and I thought I might as well have to try. And I guess maybe for context as well. So also 2016 was a year. It was a year of financial hardship for my family. We did not have a lot of money, and even like signing up and traveling to a race was was a real burden. I did not have any significant sponsorships or anything like that at the time supporting me. So I was going to this race, this Never Summer 100K. I was carrying an injury. We didn't have any money for a hotel or anything like that. So we were camping high up in the mountains with my two young daughters. I remember I went for a little called like a shakeout run the day before the race, and I went to kind of jump over a log that was across the trail, and I failed to notice there was this giant spike branch sticking out of the log, and I drove my knee right into this spike and like cut my knee open to the point where I could see like white tissue and stuff. It was disgusting. And so I ended up having to like get some pretty serious first aid on that. You know, this is all like 12 hours before the start of the race. So I have like this split open knee. I have this tendon injury. And then I was camping with my family. My youngest daughter cried almost the entire night. Like, I know parents like to exaggerate and say their kids cried all night, but like for real, I think she cried the whole night, which was unusual for her. So I got up at like 4 o'clock in the morning to get ready for this race, thinking, okay, I just pulled an all-nighter. My knee split open. This tendon in my shin hurts. I was like, this race is going to be whatever it's going to be. We'll see how it goes. My expectations were just so low. And I wasn't even thinking about the finish line, but just thinking about, well, I'll just kind of get started and give things a chance to play out. And um, I started out much slower than I often would in a race, kind of like understanding like the situation didn't look very good. Um, and somehow, about a third of the way through the race, I found myself in the lead, which just absolutely blew my mind. And I couldn't believe the opportunity. I think I'd maybe won one other race in my life before this. And so I remember just kind of running the rest of that race sort of in disbelief, thinking like, what an amazing opportunity this is. Like, I can't believe this is happening. And I ended up having to do like a literal final sprint to the finish at the end of that race. And I ended up taking first place. And so I mentioned this race because of I took a lot of mental lessons about how to never count yourself out and to give yourself a chance. It'd been really easy to say, I won't bother starting, or it'd been really easy to not even make the trip. It'd been really easy to like quit after 10 miles. But this idea of giving yourself a chance, because you never know how it can play out. Whether you quit at mile 10 or you quit at mile 40, either way you quit, but like at least you gave yourself a chance. And so I carried that attitude throughout, and by giving myself a chance, somehow it all worked out. I don't know if that all if those events all happened again, I'm not sure it would work out that well again, but it did work out on that day. So that was a great lesson. And then kind of the flip side of that, I did a race about 2 months after this in a similar area of Colorado. It's a race called Run Rabbit Run 100, and it has a pretty significant prize purse. You can win many thousands of dollars there if you do well. And all those like principles that had me do so well in this Never Summer 100K race, I sort of like let fade away because, like I mentioned, this was a year of financial hardship, and I saw this as a race as an opportunity to like solve those problems by making a bunch of money. And I did the opposite approach. I like went out too hard and I put all this pressure on myself. And it wasn't that I gave myself a chance. It was almost like this ultimatum that I had to succeed. Um, and it was probably the most miserable race of my life. I didn't have fun. I just felt under pressure. And I think it was rough. My stomach did awful. I mean, everything about it was wrong. About halfway through, I gave up and I quit. I DNF'd or did not finish. And it was an all around miserable experience. And it wasn't that like my fitness had changed. It wasn't that like I was less of a runner. But my real takeaway at the end of that year was like, wow, it is so important to be running for the right reasons and to have like be in the right headspace and have the right mindset because I was more or less I was healthier going into that race. That was late in the year. I didn't have any injuries. I didn't have a split open knee or anything like that. I even stayed in the hotel. Things should have been better, but it was dramatically worse because I lost sight of like my goals and why I do the things I do. So I've kind of vowed to never approach a race like that again, and I don't think I really have since.
Incredible insights. I mean, it's one of those things where, as I often say to people, I never dwell on anything negative that's happened in my interviews, and I do my best not to in life. But at the same time, the lessons that people learn from the challenges I've found can sometimes be more than from winning a race.
Yeah.
So, it's important to mention it. Now, flipping that on its head, races where things have gone to plan, races that you consider to be your best performances or your proudest moments. Again, this has a fascination for me because simply because you asked this question, and I never know what's going to come back. It's often not the most prestigious races, though sometimes it can be. But broadly speaking, again, another big question, although my actual attempt is to narrow down quite a few races into certain key topics. Um, what you regard to be your best performances, some of your proudest moments as a runner, some of your favorite moments. It depends how you frame it. There's a little different people look at it a different way. But I suppose some of your favorite moments as a runner, really, or things when things did go to plan.
Sure. I can think of a couple of things that are maybe some of my favorite or proudest moments. And they're actually maybe not races. During 2020, the height of COVID pandemic, there was virtually no racing in the United States. Um, and so I had, all the races I had planned to do, they were all canceled. But there was a line in the mountains here in Wyoming in the Wind River Range, just kind of above my house. There's a sort of an unofficial route on the crest of the mountains called the Wind River High Route, and it's almost 100 miles, probably like 95 miles, with 10,000 meters of climbing, and there's virtually no trail. It's without a doubt some of the wildest country in like the continental United States. Boulders the size of like buses and cars and glaciers and uh, grizzly bears and I mean you name it, it's there. And so my goal for 2020 was to try to set the speed record on that route, but run the fastest known time on it. And it was this sort of goal that was so exciting because it was going to be this massive mountain run. It was exciting to the point that I found it terrifying. Like I would lay in bed and lose sleep about it at night, and I was like constantly rehearsing it. And I trained so hard for it and did so much logistical planning, and so that was going to be a completely unsupported run. There's no roads back in this line. There's no you hardly see anybody. I mean, I would go hours and hours and hours and hours without seeing anybody. And in the end, that took me 47 hours, which with the way I did it was the better part of 3 nights. Um, and I almost either hiked or ran continuously for 47 hours over this just unbelievably challenging terrain. And I did it. I was able to get the fastest known time, and I felt completely out of my mind. And it sort of took like an unnatural motivation and dedication to the goal to make it happen. So that's probably one of my proudest running achievements and best running memories.
Amazing to hear it from that point of view. As I've already said, you never know what's going to come back from that one. Now, there's a couple of other topics, two or three topics, and we'll wrap this up. We'll go slightly over the hour, but I'm obviously
That's
mindful of your time and everything as well. You can never tell. I mean, I aim for 40 minutes to an hour, and the rest of it has a life of its own. But
no worries.
in terms of a different aspect with this as well, now again, I have to give this a little context, but in terms of races that you've enjoyed, basically what I'm getting at here is the differences between some of the very large, um, sort of commercialized races, like you mentioned, Hard Rock earlier, and obviously UTMB and Badwater. Some of these, just as examples, that are very well known and excellent races. Don't get me wrong, but different than the smaller community-based things and everything like this. And so I thought this would be an interesting topic into some of the changes that you've seen in the sport of mountain running, ultra running, over your time in the sport, positive and negative, because obviously you train and coach and everything, and we will touch on that. That's one of my other topics. In fact, I think mainly that future plans, and that should be about us sorted. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious, first of all, if you have a personal preference between some of these larger races and also some of the smaller ones, if you could illustrate some pros and cons to that. I know that's a big question as well. So again, we'll have to narrow it down to maybe a couple of things. And also then what you feel for the development of the sport. Again, it's too big to cover everything, but you see these changes like UTMB launching various sub races, if you like, and buying out various things. And people have mixed opinions. Some people think it's great, some people think it's terrible. I don't think it's black or white. I think it has pros and cons, but nonetheless, so it's sort of a two-sided question. It's a little bit complex, but I think you'll have some. Let's start with the preference side of things. Do you prefer the smaller ones, the bigger ones? Do they have pros and cons with each side?
Yeah, that's a great question. I truthfully enjoy the variety. I I have spent some time at large races like the Lavaredo Ultra in northern Italy, and like the vibe and the excitement there and the energy from so many people. It's it's infectious, and it's a really exciting thing. Um, Larger races like that can have sometimes an undeniably corporate feel. It's easy to get lost in the mix. They can be overwhelming, almost overstimulating. Um, and so I really do enjoy, not necessarily, I mean, I guess they're smaller races, is smaller and the number of competitors, um, but races that maybe have a little bit more of a community feel where like the volunteers are there because it's like it's their trail, it's their event, they love it. You can feel that difference as opposed to they've been like hooked in by some corporate sponsor or whatever it might be. And so I mean I can't always put my finger quite on what it is, but I think there is like a happier, more down to earth vibe at smaller, more community races. I think there is some races out there that do a really nice job of maybe not walking the line in between, but like smaller doesn't necessarily mean non-competitive. Or there are some races that are not enormous in size, but still will like have a great field of runners from from top to bottom, and like races where everyone can kind of feel like they have a role to be there. They're important, they matter, and so those would probably be my preference. Um, as far as the way the sport's going and growth, I mean, that's challenging for sure. Uh, there's always going to be growing pains. Change is always uncomfortable for somebody. Um, and I would include myself in that group. I don't like the seeing races bought out or kind of lose themselves is pretty unpalatable to me. But I do understand why maybe there's like a need to professionalize the sport or globalize it and have a global competition. I understand why like that could be a could have some positive traits to it, and I think certainly that's the way things are going. And to try to completely fight that seems a little bit futile to me. So I guess as it kind of to sum it up in a short way, I think growth and development and innovation are all like important, and I just hope it can be done in a maybe even a more thoughtful way, on a sustainable way in the years that come ahead.
It's a very good way of looking at it. I mean, it's something, as I said, it's a big question. So smaller races, bigger ones, whatever, everything has its place and everything has pros and cons. So there's certainly no sort of discrimination from me or anything because they all have their place. But yeah, that balance between keeping the soul of ultra running, mountain running, all of this stuff as a very special individual sport of people sort of in a way competing against themselves and some of these things with the natural areas and everything, and then growing it a bit so that more people can experience if they want to say what you experience, no matter how well they do in the race, just being out there, but that requires some aggressive expansion, but then you also don't want to lose the essence of
Exactly.
it. So, it's a balance and hopefully a balance that will be maintained, I hope. And so that's that side of things. What's the other thing I said? Oh, your coaching. This is something else that I would like to touch on because one of the things I also really like about what you do and what you represent as a person is you do give back, basically. I mean, it's something you mentioned this going all the way back to summer camps and things like that, passing on your knowledge. There's no substitute for spending time with people, is there, at the end of the day? I mean, sharing your knowledge, sharing your wisdom, sharing things about life, not just about running and all of this type of thing. And it's sort of a theme that jumps out at me a bit in your life. And broadly speaking, I suppose the question here is what that means to you personally. And obviously, feel free to give yourself a mention or a bit of a plug here about what you do with coaching, because
Sure.
if it reaches people that are hearing this for the first time and it helps you, I'm very happy with that. But also in terms of what it means to you to see somebody develop to their potential in some way or see people progress. It's a big topic, it's an intangible topic, but I think it will have a wonderful answer, to be honest.
Sure, I'll do my best to answer all that. 'Cause there's a lot I could say on it. Um, I I can have a lot of value for like when I was initially in the sport and I was really struggling, right? There was different people to me that became mentors and supported me. Some of them going through the same struggles as I was, and we would like create ideas and try to figure out why we were having this problem running or that. And um, it's running is an individual sport, but it's also so kind of strangely community oriented and can be even team oriented and group oriented, and I really appreciate that about it. And so I enjoy helping folks get through those challenges of running, just in the same way that other people kind of help me. Um, and so, particularly as a coach, I like to help people through that. I also, I like I mentioned, I have two young daughters. I have a wife. I have a few different jobs I work. Um, Getting the balance of all that right um, is a challenge. And maybe one of the things I'm most proud of in life is that I've been able to make that all work. And certainly did not happen overnight, but just I think that's a really important aspect of, uh, I guess I can call it training. That you sort of you can't really train at a high level if you don't have your life organized in a way that makes sense for you, in a sustainable way. So particularly when I'm like coaching athletes, for me, it's not just about like, okay, here's some workouts to do to make you faster. Like that's just one small piece of the puzzle, but it's about making like holistically it work for people's lives. And so that's really important to me. I really enjoy helping people get that balance so they don't feel limited by their career or their family or whatever it is if they have this desire to go out and do these big silly runs in the mountains. I like to be able to help people do those sorts of things. The other thing that I do that I get a lot of joy from is I'm one of the co-race directors of the Sinks Canyon Trail races here in Wyoming. We have a 15K, an 18K, a 6K, and a kids K race. and that is very much our like local community race here. My wife's also one of the co-race directors for that, and I get a ton of joy having those different distances, and it's sort of like a relatively approachable and can be kind of entry level race for people, but it also serves really well as a race for competitive runners too. And so to be able to create that opportunity for people and to share that with them, that's something that brings me a lot of joy and is a great way to connect with other runners and the community as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm really glad we had time to give that a mention as the second to last topic, I think, because again, it's really something that jumps out at me about your life. You know, you're very patient, you're very easy to talk with, and you embody a sort of calm, you know, as I'm speaking with you now, and I've had a busy, crazy, busy day, and I've sat down, and there's this real sense of calm, which is sort of like what I sometimes feel in nature if I'm still looking at just a still lake or something. And I know it might sound incredibly bizarre, but you have that sort of aura that you give off. And I mean that as a compliment, you know, because
Oh, I
I can
appreciate that. Thank you.
I can imagine people opening up to you and things. I know you teach and you do other things in that as well, which unfortunately we won't have time for that one. But I know that giving back is an important part of your life, so it's very good to mention. So yeah, a lot of respect for that. So I think as I said earlier, the last topic really to touch on here is basically what's next for you. Again, you know, it's a big topic that involves different life areas because and focusing mainly on the running. But if there are other things you'd like to mention, like the continuing race directing or anything further you'd like to do with that, it doesn't have to be every goal you've got, and there might be certain things you're not ready to mention yet. And obviously, I respect that. But in terms of really, in terms of your continued inspiration, you know, in the sense that it's a journey that's never finished. You've accomplished some amazing things, but I imagine there's more on the horizon with maybe with coaching, with running, with different aspects, really. And could you mention maybe one or two of those future goals, please?
Yeah, there's always so many goals. You're right about that. Um, as far as racing goals go, I really hope to have another chance to get back into the Hard Rock 100. That race is so difficult to get into, but I would love another opportunity again. A race I'd like to do maybe in the next year or two, if I can make it work, is actually the Dragon's Back, the race across the spine of Wales. So go adventure in your backyard or former backyard, however you think of it. So that's some racing goals of mine. Um, uh, I'm hoping to maybe be a race director of another race here in Wyoming, and I have some goals with the races I put on. I'd like to make them races that are maybe more accessible to a wider variety of people, maybe people who are like historically haven't felt like welcomed at different like trail running events or haven't felt comfortable or safe for whatever reason. So I have some plans in the works there to try to make races even more approachable for a wider variety of people. I have goals to expand coaching. I really enjoy running coaching a lot. I don't know if I mentioned this, so I coach with a company called Trails and Tarmac. So if you're interested in there, give them a look up. But that's something I aim to do more of. Um, and and then I guess to keep doing adventures in real wilderness areas and to kind of have those experiences, like I mentioned earlier with the Wind River High Route, to have those moments that blow me away, take my breath away, stop me in my tracks, and keep seeing this big beautiful world of ours.
Absolutely amazing. Well, I look forward to following your progress with that on a personal level, just to put that in there. I will also say to our listeners as well, a lot of them will know you, but anyone who does want to reach out to talk with you about running and maybe get some tips or anything like that, I'll advise them to do so. I'm sure that's okay with your website, gabejoyes.com, or with Instagram. I know you're on there at Gabe Joyes. It's all very easy, guys. The spelling at the bottom of the screen there. So I know you're very accessible in that way, and as I've already said, that sort of mentorship vibe really comes over. So I'm sure some people will want to reach out to you and get some tips on running and
Great.
maybe on life. So give that a mention. But other than that, thank you very much for your time. As I said earlier, taking time out of your morning, greatly appreciated. Bearing with me because I know we booked this and then I didn't. I don't think I messaged you at all until today because I've been so busy. So thank you for that. And yes, just good luck with your future plans. Best wishes to your family, and Thank you for being an open book today and sharing, some quite personal things. I'll send this to you when it's released. Be very grateful for a reshare is the only thing I'd say, if that's okay
Sure.
with you. And yeah, other than that, good luck with everything, and thank you again for your time.
Yes, thanks so much for the conversation, Liam. Appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday as well.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.